Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Will Wakeling. I'm the Acting Dean of Libraries, and I'm your official welcomer here this afternoon. So welcome to this one of our series of Meet the Author sessions here in Snell Library. I want to thank, before we go any further, the members of the library's Programming and Communications Committee for making the arrangements today. And also the NU Bookstore, who are, as ever, one of our stalwart co-sponsors for this event. We thank you. Okay. Now, as regular attendees will know, the library's Meet the Author series showcases authors whose work address current events or social issues or things that fall into that sort of domain. Brings together faculty, students, and staff to discuss some of these matters and hear from experts on the subject. And that's what we think of as a very worthy goal and motivation for the Meet the Author series, and it's something that we like to support and that we'd like you to support too. We do have a library supporters group, and you can find out about joining that or learn more about it from our website or by speaking to any of the library staff who are here today. Okay. Now, we have a most distinguished homegrown author today, Cynthia Baron, who will be talking about her new book, a tongue-twisting book, Adobe Photoshop Forensics, Sleuths, Truths, and Photography. And I'm very delighted to introduce Cynthia, who is Associate Director of the Undergraduate Multimedia Studies and Graduate Digital Media Program here at Northeastern. She was formerly...
I'm sorry, the Digital Media Program also is a co-sponsor.
Oh, I didn't realize. So the Digital Media Program is indeed a co-sponsor of the program here today. So we thank her on two different fronts for attending. Before she took over as Assistant Director, she was the Technical Director for the Department of Visual Arts here. Cynthia holds an MBA with a concentration in marketing. Her biography says that she has been active in the creative community for most of her professional life, though I suspect some of the more egregious examples she'll be talking about today have emerged from other walks of life too. She told me this morning at the NU Research Expo, which some of you may have attended down at Matthews Arena, that her undergraduate major was in theatrical design. So these things all hang together in some obscure and mysterious way. Incidentally, I asked her this morning if the poster she was presenting at the Research Expo covered the same ground as the material she'd be talking about this afternoon. And she said no, she'd done two completely separate presentations for the same day. So I think we have to honor her for the creativity she's brought to this occasion with some quite different material. Cynthia has consulted for corporations and non-profits. She's published several articles in newspapers and periodicals. She was the editor of the Design Wise series for Rockport Publishers and the former contributing editor to Critique magazine, one of the most important design publications of the 1990s. And she's going to talk about a subject which I have to admit to believing we're all absolutely fascinated with in this age of the pervasive digital image, Adobe Photoshop Forensics. Cynthia.
Okay, now let's see if you left it on. Yes. You can hear me? Yes? Great. Not well? That's the only problem with sharing mics. You don't get to make sure that it's in the right place. Ooh, let's hope it's not too loud. That good? There's a wonderful scene in Singing in the Rain where someone has a mic and they turn their head and the sound goes in and out, in and out. I'm going to try to avoid doing that. Wow, this is a great turnout. And I've got to assume that it's because you're interested in the topic, because I do not tap dance. Even though I do have that infamous undergraduate degree in theater, which I do think is relevant, because I think that a lot of photography is, to some degree, performance art, at least as it occupies, or is beginning to occupy, a space in our society today. I got into the forensics side of this kind of through the back door. My background is graphic design, and for many years I also did black and white photography for design purposes. So I was in disciplines where you're taught to look very carefully at images and to think deeply about the content in them. So when I started both receiving, as we all do, email attachments from people, hey, have you seen this? Or people sending URLs to me, my first reaction was, as I'm sure most of them are, oh, isn't this cute? Isn't this funny? Because they were obvious. They were blatant. You know, you have a dog's head on a person's body, or something of that nature. And so you can see that it's been done, and perhaps the fun of it was that it was done, not necessarily that it was done well. But something has happened as the software has gotten more powerful, and the ownership of software that edits images is more pervasive. More and more of these images are finding their way into our culture, and not all of them are funny. Not all of them are cute. And many of them do damage. So my take on what is happening with digital images right now is that we really need, on a basic level, to get better at visual literacy. A lot of people came by my posters and said, you know, I really love this stuff, but you know, I just can't see when it's edited. But it's that you haven't learned the cues that will enable you to be able to look at an image and parse it through properly. And yet, we are so much more able to parse images than people were, say, 100 years ago, even 20 years ago, as some of the things I'm going to show you today will illustrate. Before we go any further, I do want to define photography. I did not coin this word, although when I started using it, it wasn't commonly used, although it certainly is being used in many, many aspects today for different kinds of images. I define photography as the retouching, editing, combining, or misrepresenting of photographic elements with the goal of subverting reality. So everyone's reaction when I give a definition like this is, oh, come on. You know, this is just photo editing. I mean, what's the big deal? It's fun. Well, yeah, it's fun, but there's fun and there's fake. Fun is when you go up to Worth 1000 and you show how good you are at mastering Photoshop, and how creative your imagination is in being able to put things together. And I am fully in support of that. I love that stuff. The kind of fake I'm talking about is the kind of fakery that has sometimes a nasty edge to it, and other times a really damaging edge to it. A lot of it has to do with the combination of intention and result. Why did you do it? And what result did making this change have in the image and in people's experience with the image? Because these images don't exist in a vacuum. We are becoming more and more a society that sees many, many things, but doesn't necessarily look at them anymore. You watch TV, you watch an ad. An ad nowadays, a 15-second ad, could have 60, 70 images in it, maybe more if it's meant to be targeted at a certain audience. And that means that we've gotten, by and large, as a society, very good at quickly parsing the general outlines of something. We're getting used to seeing things very fast. Very fast doesn't mean very deep. There's more stuff out there. There have been a lot of experiences that people have with news images that have turned out to be faked. And people have really taken places like Reuters and other news purveyors to task for letting these things that look really egregious to some of us, just pass through. But you're talking about millions of individual images being pumped through places like Getty, like Reuters, every month. There is no way that things that are being falsified are all going to get caught. And in fact, unless someone has an agenda or by chance comes across something, most of the things that you experience as images on the internet that are faked, you probably don't know are faked. And the eye makes allowances. What I mean by that is we are very good at fast decisions, and we will actually fill in the gaps for an image that isn't as good as it could be. That will just make it better in our mind than it really is. So why is photography so wonderfully effective? Why can't we see these things? Well, some of it is just we have some limitations. It's kind of ironic. Human beings, anyone who used to be able to see and is blind now, will tell you what an amazing gap in their experience with the world that creates. Our world in particular is very image-driven. And yet, our physical limitations of understanding what we see are monumental. Anyone who works on a computer screen and draws with it knows that the computer can tell the difference when you have blue that's keyed at 135 and you change it to 137. The computer sees that as a different color, and if you click with the magic wand, it'll select just the stuff that was 135, and it will ignore the stuff that's 137, even though to you it looks exactly the same. You have to really add those numbers. You have to really spread out into a different color before we can see the difference. Which means that editing that takes place, that perhaps the computer would be able to see, we can't. We really can't see it. And the computer has reached the point, both software and hardware, the resolution, the imaging capabilities of digital photography have reached the point where they're technical, the amount of sheer visual information, and not just visual, but all sorts of other information, which is embedded inside the file, is so deep and so rich that we get perhaps 1/10 of it. We look at images through our own filter. We have biases and expectations. Photography, to a large degree, works because we prefer on a basic level not to question it. If you see an image online that confirms your assumption about something, you're a lot less likely to look critically at that image than if it says something that you disagree with. For example, I don't have it with me, although it is in the book. There's a really funny photoshopped image of George Bush reading a children's book to a group of first or second graders, and the book is upside down. Which, just describing it, you know, everyone can visualize Bush, they can visualize the book, they can see why this is a funny image. Now, this made it across the internet with most people really believing it was true. Some person took a look at it and said, it can't be true because the binder is in the wrong direction. In other words, they looked carefully at the book and said, oh, the book isn't really upside down. Only that little piece of it is, obviously photoshopped. And then there's this thing that I refer to as false skepticism. I'm sure that you've all heard the phrase from someone, you know, I really am awfully skeptical about, and then you can fill in the blanks, ghosts, good restaurants. I mean, you can do whatever. And then the next part of the phrase is always, but I have now seen this or done this or gone, and I'm not a skeptic anymore. See, I have been converted. Our experience with images is like that as well. We tend to view ourselves, in fact, we tend to be written up in the media as being a much more skeptical, image-skeptical society than we actually are. We still, on a gut level, for us, seeing is believing. So let's talk about what makes a faux image. They're not all the same, although the range of them is pretty broad. There's faux images that are faux because they were staged. They were planned in advance. There are faux images that are faux not because they're really faux, but because they've been given a new context and spin doctored. And then there are the kind of images that are faux that you think of as faux when you hear the term, which are images that have been deliberately manipulated. This is a photograph from about 1910. This photograph was, around this period of time, was when people who weren't professional photographers were able to start playing around with photography on their own. You know, we're talking about upper middle class people. This photo purports to be a picture of a teenage girl communing deeply with a fairy. Now, to our eyes, this image looks patently false. The fairy looks two-dimensional. It looks staged. And yet, it's a real image in that no actual change in the negative or the print took place in the creation of it. Arthur Conan Doyle, the person who wrote all of the Shakespeare novels, all the stories. Ooh. Sherlock Holmes, God. Sorry. You would think that, that someone who could write like that would be a really astute viewer of imagery and of society. Well, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a spiritualist, and this series of photographs made him go out and write a book called The Coming of the Fairies, in which he talked about how we were on the verge of a new relationship with fairies and goblins and ghosts, and because they were all going to come out now, because they weren't afraid of us anymore. We had risen to a higher spiritual plane. And he brought these photographs to photographic experts who told him, no, these have not been altered. And that was good enough for him. Now, this photo has been making its way across the internet. This is, of course, Barack Obama. It's a picture of him in a Somali elder's dress. It's a real image. He went to Africa. He toured several African countries. And as politicians everywhere do, you know, they eat the local food and they put on the local dress. And that's exactly what he did. But on the internet, the context has been changed. The context is, this proves he's really a Muslim. No one has altered the photo, but this is photography. Then, look very carefully at this one. Now, this is something, if you look at the lower corner, you'll see this was something from a Worth 1000 contest. It's one of my great favorites. I think that it's just beautifully done. So it's a fake image. Someone combined a real human skeleton at normal human size with scaled-down pictures. But it was given a new context primarily on the Arabic sites, who said that this was proof that giants once walked the earth. And that we now had proof from biblical stories that this actually was real. There are a lot of things that were created for Worth that find their way into individual blogs and websites. And they're all over the place. Believe me, there's no way to track them all down. Now, this is a slightly different situation. This is a real image as well. And it has had changes done with Photoshop that traditional photographers would consider as darkroom changes. This image has been heavily toned. The original was also a silhouette, and it was striking. But the color has been shifted. Saturation has been increased. Now, the meaning of this image hasn't changed. In other words, our experience with this image, it's dramatic, it's beautiful, it's a lovely piece of photographic art, and it got the photographer fired from his job as a news photographer, because newspapers are extremely nervous about being caught out with altering photography in the news section. And they are knee-jerk reacting even when the circumstance doesn't change, does not actually manipulate the content of the image, as opposed to this. Yeah, this is a fake image. Although, if you go to the FHM site, which is a men's site, this is as close to PG as I could find. That this is a picture ostensibly of Rachel Ray. I don't know if any of you are Food Network fans, but she's kind of a star of the Food Network. And she's a polarizing figure. Some people think she's really wonderful. Obviously, somebody thinks she's hot. And a lot of these pictures have found their way onto the internet with a footer, I might add, of a photographer and I've actually contacted this guy who, before he stopped answering my emails, swore that those were real pictures. Now, what's not real about these pictures? Anyone see anything that makes you wonder? The face is wrong.
Well, that's not her body anyway.
Right. It's a Frankenbody. That means that it's been put together with a face and compositive elements. See that face? That's not her. But it's not the only fake thing you're going to see here. Do you see anything else other than the fact that she's got a fake face, that the head is pasted onto the body?
It's a really big chair.
Actually, believe it or not, the chairs, I think, are real. No, no, I think that the turkey is probably real, too.
There's a weird channel coming off the bottom of the wall there.
There are several things. You know, it's like one of those highlights things we used to do when we were kids. First, you see that wall? I've got an arrow there. Follow that down and up, and you will see that they don't match. Why? I think because they wanted to make the models finer points more fine. And they were working in a hurry. The wallpaper is completely fake. All of those cherries are all pasted on. They're graphics that were picked up on clip art. And the image itself, now they've obviously shot someone who is willing to put on this little outfit and, you know, get their photo taken. But I want to draw your attention to that little green line by her leg. If you zoom this image up, you discover that there is this weird space on the ground to the side of her leg, which indicates that something has been squished, moved, altered, pulled. When I took this image into Liquify and sort of reverse engineered it, watch the leg. Yes, in fact, they wanted her so skinny that she couldn't even have muscles. So you're talking about a total faux image, an image that probably the only thing that was totally real is the background. There are several other pictures in this series, and I am reasonably sure that the background is real. The rest, Frankenbody. So now that we've kind of defined our terms, this kind of thing plays out in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different venues. It plays out in people's body images, feeling that they should be much skinnier than is healthy because they see pictures of people who have been photoshopped. You have things that are meant to make you think something different, are meant to start controversy. But the place where false reality, particularly in this season, is really beginning to and will periodically show itself is in politics. And nowadays, the false reality in politics, let me make this very clear, as you'll see in some of these pictures, this goes back a long way, as long as photography. But the difference is, back when photography, in other words, the altering of these images, began in a kind of wholesale fashion, you had to be the dictator of a large country to be able to completely make over reality. That is no longer the case. So I refer to this as the strange bedfellows concept. When you put two people together, in essence, you either make one of them seem better. Let's say you take them and you put one person together with someone that they admire. So that means you make them better. Or you put them together with someone that you detest, which means you make them worse. So the strange bedfellows is all about putting together people who may or may not have actually ever met in real life. The king of this was Joseph Stalin. This is really a very famous photograph, particularly famous in Russia. This photograph was everywhere. It purports to be a picture of Joseph Stalin. That's the guy with the mustache on the right, for those of you who maybe don't know him. And Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Revolution, on the left. And of course, Lenin was, particularly at this period of time, which was about mid-20s, sort of a god. You know, he could do no wrong. And Stalin was trying to move in. And so even though, in fact, Lenin heartily disliked Stalin, didn't trust him, didn't like him, and basically didn't want to spend any time with him. So there were really almost no photographs of Lenin and Stalin together. So Stalin made them happen. He rewrote his reality for an entire country. Now, how do we know that this is a fake? Well, there's a lot of ways. First, if you look at the chair, you know, this kind of thing makes me afraid of getting furniture in Russia. Because there's something very strange about the direction that the chair legs are in. And, you know, the chair is bad enough, but what about that fence in the background? Now, that yellow line indicates that that fence is not true to the level of the photograph. And if you look in the back in the section that's highlighted yellow, you'll see that they even stopped trying to make it look like a real fence when they got over to that side. You look at the rest of the fence and you see that, in effect, I'm willing to bet that the whole thing was done with a mask cutout and just two-dimensionally pasted on. But even if they'd done a much better job at this, what you're seeing here is approximately where the light is coming from on the Stalin body. He was shot in full daylight, really bright, sunny day. How do I know? Because there's a lot of contrast between the shadow and the light area, which you're not going to get when you have softer light or indoor light. And it's very consistent. You don't have any complicated lighting things going on to mess it up. Lenin, on the other hand, if you follow those arrows, you discover that there's no light in any of the places where there should be if his light and Stalin's light matched up. And the light that is on him comes from a completely different direction entirely. There are other things that you can't see in this photo unless you could bring it up close, but things like their eyes are pointing in different directions. They're looking at different cameramen. This is not an anomaly. There are not just tens, not just hundreds, but thousands of photographs from the Soviet era that were part of the industry of photography. It was a very large part of Stalin's budget, because being able to recreate reality meant that he could control a very large and disparate populace. So how does this play out? This is a publicity photograph. Most of these photos I'm going to show you are from the 2004 electoral cycle, because we're just getting started on this one. Obviously, this is our fearless leader with Howard Kalugin, who was running for a representative position out in California. He was a Republican. And this was his major publicity photo. But if you take this into one of the many pieces of software that are meant to help you see what you cannot see with the naked eye, this is something called Convolver, which essentially allows you to see very fine differences in grays. I want to point out that both of these guys are wearing, black, gray jackets. But when you look at the place where those two jackets cross each other, you should see something very strange. Howard Kaloogian likes his president so much that he's become a part of him. Yes, it's true. There is no border between these two men. They're merged. Now, the truth came out. Kaloogian, it turns out, I don't know if you all know this, but George Bush was a fairly tall guy. Well, Howard Kaloogian is 5'3". And when he had his picture taken with George Bush, he looked at the proofs and he said, "Oh my God, I look like a shrimp. What am I going to do?" And so he went to his friendly neighborhood Photoshop person and said, "Do something about this," because he wasn't high enough on the food chain to get George Bush back there for another shoot. Because of this image being discovered, he lost. He was one of the few theoretical shoe-in people for representative. And he was not a shoe-in because people laughed at him when they discovered this. That's a small example of the power of photography, photography, and the unmasking thereof. Now, this is what happens when two people are trying to cozy up to each other. This one is another one of those things that made its way all over the political blogs, mostly the conservative ones. I'm a child of this era, and I remember that for a lot of people, Jane Fonda was sort of the devil incarnate. She went to North Vietnam, and she allowed herself to be used as propaganda for them. And a large swath of people in a certain age group and political interest have never forgiven her for this. And therefore, putting her on the same dais with John Kerry, who was running for president in 2004, essentially says that's who he was. That is, that he can't be trusted. He says that he fought, but we all know the drill. The point is that Jane Fonda, that character, she was never in that photo. These are the two originals. Both of these photos, they were shot by different photographers. There is, by the way, a libel suit going on attached to this one. But they were both being shopped by Getty, the online Getty. And as you probably know if you've ever gone looking for photos, Getty gives you a low-resolution image so that you can work with it in a comp, play with it, figure out if that's what you want before you're going to pay an outrageous amount of money, in some cases, for it. But the images are there for the taking for low resolution. And of course, if you look at that, that's pretty low resolution. That, in fact, is one of the most important things to know about photography. If you're asking yourself the question, is this thing real or not, when you see it on the internet, do a Google search on it for images only. And in the drop-down menu that asks you to choose an image size, it'll give you all of the images if you don't use the drop-down. Go to large or extra large. I guarantee you that if it's a photography piece, You will never find a large image version of it because they've all been things that have been taken from small, low-resolution pieces. You don't just have to put two people together. You can subtract and add people. Back to Stalin. He's that guy in the front, the young Stalin. This was one of those classic pieces where everyone who's involved on a committee, in this case it was an art committee, by the way, is sitting there and having their picture taken. This was 1920. This is 1923. Something's missing. Actually, two somethings are missing, because one of them was exiled and the other one was shot. Stalin was taking over, and that was the best way to get rid of inconvenient people. You could do it the other way as well. This is a picture of Lenin talking to a real crowd of workers at the beginning of the revolution. Now, it's a decent-sized crowd. You know, it looks real. You've got a lot of people hanging on his every word. But when you deify someone, a few hundred just isn't good enough. So, just a few years later, after Lenin had died, they redid and reissued the photo and retired the original to the archives. And this is what everyone in the USSR saw as the historical Lenin addressing Red Square for, well, let's see now, 50 years until the others came out of the archive. But a good idea is a good idea no matter what era it is. This is also from the 2004. It's a screenshot from YouTube of a meeting in which George Bush was addressing the troops. Well, it turned out that they didn't feel like there were enough troops. So if you follow the color-coded boxes, you'll notice that some of the more photogenic guys toward the front were reused, resampled. Here we are. It's 2008, and it's a new cycle. And a new cycle means that it begins again. Now, I have to say that so far, I feel that we haven't seen anything close to the kind of wild photography in the political arena for the presidential election that we saw in the previous one. I don't think that's going to last. And to explain why, I'm going to show you couple of short clips. That means I have to leave my little screen here, and so you're going to have to bear with me while I run a couple of things for you. Let's see.
But I also have heard Senator Obama refer continually to Afghanistan, and he references being on the Foreign Relations Committee. He chairs the subcommittee on Europe. It has jurisdiction over NATO. NATO is critical to our mission in Afghanistan. He's held not one substantive hearing to do oversight, to figure out what we can do to actually have a stronger presence with NATO in Afghanistan. You have to look at the entire situation to try to figure out how we can stabilize Afghanistan and begin to put more in there to try to get some kind of success out of it. And you have to work with the Iraqi government so that they take responsibility for their own future.
Senator Obama, I want you to respond to not holding oversight for your subcommittee, but also, do you reserve the right, as American president, to go back into Iraq once you have withdrawn with sizable troops in order to quell any kind of insurrection or civil war?
Well, first of all, I became chairman of this committee at the beginning of this campaign, at the beginning of 2007. So it is true that we haven't had oversight hearings on Afghanistan. I have been very clear in talking to the American people about what I would do with respect to Afghanistan.
That's one. This was the Ohio debate between Clinton and Obama. About 2 weeks later, maybe not even that, was the Texas vote, and it was time to do advertising. And you know, frankly, TV advertising is kind of the lowest of the low of this kind of thing. It all follows a kind of predictable thing. The idea is to sort of make you be afraid of the other person or judge them. And everyone plays this game, even the people who say they don't play this game. But this is a piece that essentially extracts that little chunk of information, that little back and forth between Clinton and Obama, and plays it out in an ad.
Barack Obama says he has the judgment to be president, but as chairman of an oversight committee charged with the force of fighting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, he was too busy running for president to hold even one hearing.
I became chairman of this committee.
Look very carefully at the Obama image.
So it is true that we haven't had oversight hearings on Afghanistan.
Hillary Clinton will never be too busy to defend her.
Okay, so you've just seen two images. Did you notice that there was a slight difference in them? Let's see if I can run it back for you. So that's Obama, kind of as you'd see him in the Hillary ad. And here is basically the same moment as you saw it in the debate. Some photoshopping has taken place. Now, I got involved in this sort of on the side because a person who was a Barack supporter basically emailed me and said, there's stuff going on the internet that says that, you know, they're playing the race card. And here's this blogger who says that they masked his face and made it darker, that they did all of the stuff deliberately. Did they? Can you tell? So my first reaction is, how the heck do I know? My second reaction was, you know, it is possible to figure it out if I'm willing to sort of deconstruct, sort of work backwards and see if I can figure out what took place. So here are the two images. This is just screen grabs from what I just showed you. Now, the question is it a Simpson job? Those of you who may not remember this, O.J. Simpson was arrested for the murder of his wife. And that's his mugshot that you're looking at. The one on the left is the real mugshot, exactly as it was taken by the police. And the one on the right is the way that that mugshot was put on the cover of Time magazine. In fact, this was the first blatant and acknowledged use of photography on a news magazine cover. There had been some other situations, but this is the one that really came to the forefront because it was obviously a deliberate decision to make him a little bit scarier. Now, I'll run that back to you again. So the question is, was that the intention? I'm going to show you what I did. I immediately threw out the possibility that someone had gone in and masked Obama's face. That's crazy. You would have to do that in every frame, following this guy's face around. It would never happen. But that doesn't mean that you cannot tone selectively. So you can make a change overall in the image. The reason why, by the way, the bloggers thought that it was a mask was that his shirt was still white, even though his face had gotten appreciably darker. Well, yeah, but there are other ways of doing that. And the way you would do that is to run a curves adjustment on the entire clip. What you're looking at is the curve that would be necessary to make the adjustment changes that I saw in the clip. When you look at input and output, input, that's what, okay, back it up 2 seconds. In the computer, if you don't know this already, the range from white to black, or in this case, black to white, black is 0, white is 255, okay? So the lower the number is, the closer to black the color is. The higher the number is, the closer to white. So in this case, by toning the image, by taking the curve down, something that was at a darkness of 79 on the scale of 255 is now 52. But you'll notice if you follow the curve all the way up, it doesn't affect the stuff at the very top, which is white, at all. The curve flattens out and joins the original at the top. You can see, if you look carefully, that the background colors have changed and his suit color has changed just as his face have changed, because they're all darker colors. The next step is one that the Clinton advertisers admitted that they had done, because, frankly, it's standard attack ad practice across the board, is to desaturate the image of your opponent. Desaturation distances you from them, makes them feel less real, makes them feel darker, more washed out, makes the entire piece look more grim. So it's standard operating procedure. No one has any question about the fact that desaturation took place. This is the one that got me, and that made me tell the person who asked me, honestly, I don't know if it was deliberate or if it was just stupid. Why do I say that? In order to match, if you look at the picture on the right, that picture is a dead-on match to the screen grab from the Hillary ad. The difference between the two images is that the aspect ratio has changed. The height remains the same, but the width has been increased 10%. Now, Obama's a guy with really high cheekbones, really, really long face, very angular looking. And he's also very, he's fairly pale-skinned and slender. In the race world, there are expectations that people have about what a white person looks like, what a Chinese person looks like, what a black person looks like, because that's what stereotypes are all about. And of course, most of us, of whatever race we are, don't fit those stereotypes. But you can play with them nonetheless. And if you round and spread out a face, you're going to blunt all of the angles, and you're going to change the perception of the ethnic group. The question isn't, did it happen, but was it deliberate? And the reason why I question whether it was deliberate or not, and I have to throw it at you as you decide, is that if you go back and you look at that ad, you'll see that there's type on the left of it. You've got the clip on the right and type on the left. As a graphic designer who has, oh, Lord knows, many a time had to adjust images to make them fit a layout, you're often much more sensitive to what's happening with your typeface than you are to the person's face. It's just a clip. I think that there's a real possibility that the person who did this in After Effects, which is almost definitely what they used for this, which is Photoshop for things that move, may not have even realized what they'd done. We will never, unless someone is willing to come out and say definitively, we will never know. But looking at those two clips, if you were someone who had only seen the second clip and weren't all that familiar with what Barack Obama looks like, anything that you have, remember this was Texas, could have been played out. And believe me, anyone who tells you that politicians and the people who do their ads don't think about those things is lying to you. So I guess I want to leave you with the opportunity for questions and just one thought. If you're really interested in going beyond sort of accepting images as you get them, for us, the reason why I think that this phrase is really relevant is that if a photograph is invisible as a photograph to us, we don't realize it's an object. And the fact that we don't realize it's an object means we don't realize that it's something we can crunch and move and stretch and change. If we are aware of the frame, if we're aware of the fact that we have an object that can be altered, our relationship to our digital reality and our images is immediately and profoundly going to change. I'm done. It's your turn. Questions? Yes.
Do you have any evidence that the Obama camp has done the same thing to Hillary so far?
Sure.
Do you have any evidence that the Obama camp has done to Hillary up till now? Or just an open question?
I have no evidence that that has taken place. On the other hand, do I believe that if they felt they needed to, they would? I believe they would. I think that politics is a kind of dirty game and you use the tools that you have at hand. I have not had anyone send me, nor have I seen yet, anything that is certainly as obvious as that. But remember that there's two levels of this kind of stuff. There's the stuff that's done by the official campaign, which is always, if it's done at all, is very subtle. This was subtle. And then you've got all of the people who are partisans, who don't feel, who aren't connected officially to the campaign. And remember what I said about there being millions and millions of images out there? Unless you go to the right blogs, or you have someone who's looking at the right blogs, you might not even know that it had been done. So I can't answer that. I can only tell you I haven't seen it yet.
In your flyer, you had mentioned that you often see scientific fraud as well. What's the most common type of scientific fraud, and how do they usually go about that with data?
Oh, Honestly, the most common type of scientific fraud isn't visual. It's people faking their notebooks, faking the original data, because when you publish in a jury journal, unless they really think there's something wrong, no one goes to your original notebooks. In other words, it's mostly data and text. When images are faked, it's usually electron microscope things, which is why a lot of the scandals that have come up, like the Korean Stelsen thing, were able to be caught because electron microscopic photography is like any other photography. It can be altered. And it's all false color. Electron microscopes that just do black and white, and everything else, the color is added to help you see the image better. So it leaves you a really wide range to be able to play games with this. Not to plug the book, but I do have a whole chapter on this with pictures.
And before we have another question, there will be an opportunity to buy copies of the book signed by the author immediately afterwards. So we're not going to have too long for questions, because I know Cynthia has to teach at 5:30 as well. So 5 more minutes maybe, is that right?
Yeah, about 5, quarter past, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm using Photoshop Elements. What version of Photoshop are you using?
Am I using?
Yeah,
Being an academic, I am using Photoshop CS3 because there are a lot of things that you just can't do in Elements. Although, honestly, you've got a lot of the tools, the tools that I showed, that those are available. Histograms are available. You don't even need to have Photoshop. You could use GIMP, which is free. It doesn't have as many tools in it, but it reads Photoshop files pretty well, and it lets you do a lot of things with them.
Okay, just one other question. How does a person get more training in doing this? Just for fun or whatever?
Well, interestingly enough, you could say start taking a couple of art courses because it's sort of like exercise for the eye-brain connection. You're forced to look carefully at things because you can't draw them if you can't see them. And that tends to have an effect on your visual acuity in general, the ability to notice things that don't look right. Other than that, take a picture that you know is false. Zoom it up in Photoshop and start looking for things. In the book, I've got lists of things to look for, kind of typical things that will say this is a fake versus this is not a fake. And one of the best things you can do is just practice. I wish that there were more. I wish that the kind of visual acuity that I really feel that our society needs was available in a convenient, go take this class and you will see it all. But at least at this point, it isn't. You kind of have to be self-educated and aware. But as I said, a drawing course would help.
Yeah, I mean, I am doing a lot of this now just for kicks. I didn't realize how much fun it was.
Oh, it is. It's lots of fun.
Okay, so do you offer courses just to give people more training?
I personally do not train people in Photoshop. On the other hand, I am the associate director of a graduate program where we have digital photography classes. And they certainly, not only do they teach you a lot about images in general, but they also teach you how to use the tool better.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
What's the worst consequence that you can think of where the public has been duped? Do you find instances where military in this or any other country, or the executive branch of this or any other country, has used photography to sway public opinion?
you know, this is almost like what is the perfect murder? Because if it's that good, you're never going to see it. On the other hand, I got a really tiny window into this because one of my colleagues in this kind of weird world deals with security issues with the federal government. And he is somewhat disdainful about the government's technical and security abilities. He says that they're light years behind our media and the commercial world, light years behind. And he says that's true for sound as well as for image. That doesn't mean that there aren't some really clever people out there, but if it's done, and I'm sure it's been done, because, you know, hey, it's there. I don't know of an egregious one. For me, honestly, the worst ones, the worst examples are the ones in which researchers, medical researchers in particular, falsify their data. Because that has a direct correlation in sending people off in the wrong direction and ends up meaning death, loss of human life from falsification. And to me, that's about as bad as it gets.
I have another question, so that's sort of the opposite end. Why do you suppose a publication like the National Enquirer has such bad photographs of us being visited by aliens?
Because they can. Because the threshold, they've actually gotten a little better. The earlier stuff is amazing. But the threshold on this stuff is unbelievably low. I would hate to suggest that you do this because it's really, really, really tedious. But if you search, if you go through some of the sites on topics that, well, you know, aliens and strange occurrences, some religious ones, you know, it depends. There are often lots of images that purport to show deities or gods or aliens or whatever, photoshopped things that you, with no training whatsoever, like the National Enquirer stuff, would look at and just giggle. And yet, there are people who see these as real. That's what I mean about really needing a crash course in digital literacy. We, at least, are inundated with the media, and we have a threshold, and that threshold is obviously higher than, say, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's, an educated man, at the turn of the century. Special effects from the 1950s look really stupid to us now, but they were believed and they were seen as pretty good back then. The eye moves on, but that doesn't mean that it moves on for everyone. One more and then we go? One more?
Because we believe so heavily what we see, has any thought been given, or has there been any discussion yet about instituting legal standards for truthfulness in photography?
Ooh.
And persecuting some of the...
You do mean prosecuting, I hope. I hope you mean prosecuting, not persecuting, right?
Yes, I do. That's correct.
That's okay. I got caught on Holmes, remember? The brain does really fun things to us after the age of 30, trust me. But it's a really good question. It's such a good question that I at least one chapter in my book and maybe portions of others deal with it. The short answer is yes. The long answer is, well, the medium answer is No one can come up with a set of standards that everyone can agree on. It's sort of like pornography. You know it when you see it, when it's really bad. But there's this gray area as it moves its way along. No one's in the position yet where they can say this is it. Okay.
All right, well, thank you.